Good afternoon and welcome back to another Unreal tutorial. So in this video we will be going through the concepts of creating a motion controller. Now this is going to be quite universal. I'm going to be testing mine on the Oculus Rift as that's what I have available. This should work for things like the Vive as well. And I just wanted to mention that obviously at this stage people can download the VR template. The reason that I'm making these videos is that people have contacted me asking me to make tutorials about this type of thing. Just because when you're getting started out with VR, some of the setup there and the way that things are working don't necessarily make sense because it's doing a lot of things for you right away. So I'm going to take this back a step. In these videos, we're going to be making everything from scratch. We're going to be creating very simplistic implementations. So with like the VR template, you've got the mechanical hands working with different button presses. Again, this is one of the things that when you're just getting started, that may be a little bit too in-depth. So we're going to be making some nice simple looking spheres for hands, just so that we can get the tracking down and we can understand how they're working and how to implement them. And then the idea being is that once you've gone through this content with me, you can then download projects like that and you'll have a better understanding of at least the very basics and then start looking at how the more advanced stuff has been made, like the fingers and getting the skeletal meshes and stuff working. So to begin with, I'm just going to go through the assets we'll be using. Again, I do have a material that I've imported. So if you wanted the transparent hand or sphere that I'm going to be making, all you need is a material that looks like this. It is a vector parameter. To get one of these, you just press V and click somewhere, and this will give you a new scalar vector, which I've just named color. I've connected this into the base color, multiplied the color as well by the opacity, and also made a scalar parameter. Again, you can get one of these by pressing S and left clicking, and I've called the scalar value opacity. And the other important thing to know about this material is if you just click either on the main material node over here or anywhere in the background, I've set the material domain to be surface and translucent this time. Default lit and everything as it's set is going to be fine. And with that done, I've then just made a material instance of this. And this is just where I've set the color and how much opacity I wanted it to have. Okay, so with that out of the way, the next thing I want to run through very quickly is if we go back to the player base, there are some pre-built motion controller objects you can make. And I didn't want to use these by themselves. We're going to need to make an actor just so we can add some functionality and stuff into them. But if you wanted these, you can come in, you can add components and find motion controller. Now, if you've got the Google plugin content installed, you're going to have access to the Google VR motion controller. And then you've also got the standard motion controllers for most of your desktop applications as well. Now, the Google one is really handy. If you've got the Daydream Pixel, in the newer versions, you can just install this as long as you've got the plugin installed like I mentioned, and you actually get the option for the controller mesh over here, so that's pretty cool. So in the viewport we can see that this should actually give us the Google Daydream motion controller as a visual representation as well. It's added a really strange material to that, but that's fine because like I said, we're not going to be using this, we're going to be implementing and spawning our own. Just wanted to mention that these do exist if you wanted to play around with them, and in case people ask why I'm not using them, it's just because we're going to make our own from scratch and we will be adding a bit of functionality to those. So what we want to do is we can do this with a basic actor class. So we can create a blueprint class, a new actor class, and we'll call this the BP_motion controller. Inside of here, we will need to create a few variables. And the first one we want is something to represent the hand. And this is going to be an enumerator. So we'll call this E_hand. And again, I'm keeping a lot of this as close to the template stuff in case you do want to look at this afterwards. And there's a few things you'll notice which don't work. The last time I opened up the VR template, it was slightly outdated, and I'll be covering the correct way, the up-to-date way that they've changed some of the structure and the naming. So if you notice you've got a warning or anything in the template still, then this should fix that as well. So we'll want to change this variable type. We're going to change this to a standard type in the engine called the eController hand. So we'll find the eController hand, which is just again an enumerator. It's got various options. The main ones we want are the left, the right, but you've also got all of these if you have special cases. That's got us ready for the next step. So we can come over here. I'm going to create a default scene route. So we'll create the default scene route. And this is where we're actually going to be implementing the motion controller component. So from here, we want to find the motion controller. Like I mentioned, you can use the Google version if you wanted, if you're using that. Otherwise, I'm just going to use the standard motion controller for the desktop demonstrations I'll be doing. The name is fine, it is a motion controller. And then nested inside of this, I just want to create a sphere. So this is going to be our hand representation, so I'm just going to call this hand. And I'm going to set the size down to, I think 0.2 worked fine here, as that's not too big in comparison to the scale of the pawn. Okay, so if those ready, we want to go to the construction script, and for the motion controller we want to set the motion source. So we'll control drag this in, we will pull off of the motion controller and we'll set the motion source. And if we look at this, we can see, again, this is a built-in variable, and it just expects essentially a E controller enumeration. So this is why we've made our E hand over here. So we can control drag this in, we can have this preset. It will do a conversion for us, and I think this is one of the things which was throwing a warning error in the template. I think one of the structure names has changed to something, and then we can plug that in and we can set that on the construction script so that whatever we change our exposed variable to, and that's a point we need to make sure we expose this, then that will be updated to the motion controller. Okay, so that's our very simple first step, and what we want to do now is we will go back to our pawn class and we want to actually implement these and start spawning them onto our object or our pawn. So we're going to do this in the event graph on the event begin play, so we can get rid of this and we'll just keep this gaze check for now. And then if we bring back in the event begin play, and what we want here is I'm going to set this up with a branch check actually, so we'll do a branch and we'll find out whether or not we actually need the motion controllers. So we'll promote this to a variable, and I'll call this B spawn controllers, and that should be set by default to be true, so for our test this should work. And then from here I'm going to pull and get a sequence node because we want to do this twice, once with the left and once with the right hand, so we'll get sequence. For the first sequence we're going to spawn an actor from class, so spawn actor from class, and we're just going to want that to be our BP underscore motion controller. With the motion controller, we just want to set this up. So we're going to split the structure pin so that this can just spawn somewhere. Now, this is kind of a cheat way. If we left this as a transform and hit compile, then we're going to get an error saying it doesn't know where to spawn it. If we split the structure pin and hit compile, that's just going to allow us to set these as the default value. So it's going to spawn in the middle of the player, which is fine because as soon as you move the motion controllers, they're going to move to your sides anyway. So if you ever get that error and you don't want to specifically make a variable or something, you can just default that out to 0, 0 and 1 for the scale. So with that done, we now have our left controller spawned. We want to keep a reference to this, so we'll promote this to a variable when it's created it. And we're going to call this one the BP underscore motion controller left, or just L for short. And then we want to make sure that this is actually attached to the player pawn so that it will follow us. I'm going to attach this to the camera root. So if we control drag in the camera root, pull off of this and say attach to component, plug that in there. And what we want, we've done that the wrong way around. So if we plug that in as the parent, we'll plug the camera root as the parent and the motion controller as the target. And it will just pull out the root component for us, which is perfectly fine. There's no socket name to attach this to, and we want to snap the location to the target. So we'll set the location to snap to target. And in fact, I think we need to do that for all of them. So we'll snap all of these to target, apart from the scale, which we will actually keep as keep relative. So that's our left hand. We can pretty much, we're going to copy and paste this and do this for the right hand. So again, we'll plug that in down there. We didn't want to copy this bit because we're going to promote this to its own variable. So we'll promote this to be the BP underscore motion controller left, right. So same naming convention, but we just put an R at the end of that. And then we'll plug this into the attach to component. We'll plug that in as the target. And that again should be fine to snap and keep relative what we have there. Okay, so that should now be working. If we go into the main window, press play, look around, it's not going to work very well because I don't have the rift set up, but you can see there that the objects have spawned as we can see the shadow of the sphere. And I just realized there was in fact one thing I forgot to do here. So if we go back to the player base, if we go back to the motion controller, I've exposed this. I also need to set this to be exposed on spawn so that when we're actually creating this in the player class, if we compile that and save it, if we go over here, we can now see that when we create the object, we are getting the option to set which hand this is. So we can leave the first one, the BP motion controller L, to left, but we want to make sure that we change this to the right hand, just so that has the correct references to the two different motion controllers we have. With that done though, I should now be able to test this in VR. So I've just got the motion controllers, get rid of that. And with that done, I just realized, well, I needed to restart the system to get the Oculus to actually recognize it was plugged in. And then I also remembered that we need to come into the motion controller and make sure that you set the material to be the transparent hand material. With all of that done though, and a lot of hoping because it's VR, if we press play, everything should work. So I've now got my head tracking coming in. I'm spawning over here. You can see the motion controllers are waving around. And so that is technically working. So that's everything we wanted. We've got the initial steps of the motion controllers set up. I've got the head tracking and the gaze tracking working in virtual reality as well. And just to double check, I'm going to put the headset on properly. I should be able to see so the widget's showing perfectly fine, even in the VR headset. And yeah, again, the motion controller is about the right size, slightly transparent so that we can see through things. And that all seems to be working well. So that's the first steps of the motion controller. We'll come back next time and add some functionality into that. I'm going to leave that one here for today though. As always, if you've enjoyed the video or found this useful, then please do leave a like and share the video around. To be kept up to date with all of the content coming from any of the playlists on the channel, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And as ever, thanks for watching, and I will see you all next time.